So welcome everybody to this Monday, 10th of March 2025 meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. For the purposes of those online who don't know who I am Andrew Garrett, the chair of the committee. Get a little bit of feedback there, but hopefully it will cure itself. First of all, just to let you know that there are no planned fire drills during this meeting, so if you hear the fire alarms sound, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route, which is via the stairs to your left as you go out these doors, or the public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building and walk across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. Of course, the lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency, and please do not re-enter the building until you're advised it's safe to do so by a member of staff. Okay, so on to the matters before us. We have a very long agenda. It is 696 pages worth of agenda, but hopefully that won't necessarily correlate with the length of the meeting. But first of all, any apologies or changes in membership?
No apologies.
I'm advised of none either. So it may be that councillors Luciani and Redrup will be arriving a little bit later, but we are quorate, so we may proceed, which is good news. So item 2 of our business is the minutes of our last meeting. You may recall that was last year, 9th of December 2024. Are those a correct record, or is there anything needing to? Are those hands to? Sorry, moving acceptance. Councillor John.
I'll forgo the typos. There's only one section I couldn't resolve, which was on page 8, section 39A, penultimate line. I couldn't work out what it was supposed to say. It has the word odge in it, which doesn't resolve to be or of very well.
Can you help me a bit more, Councillor Jarman? Where am I looking exactly?
39A.
39A.
Penultimate line, starting actually on the one before that. A request was made, a clarification be provided, odge, planning and officer delegation.
I presume that is an of?
Wouldn't be of planning and officer delegation? Doesn't sound right.
Christmas made that clarification. I think it's.
I don't know what it should be.
I think it's an on.
On?
I think it is an on.
On? Okay.
Sorry, Councillor Jarman, that one escaped me in my reading through. Normally I pick all of these things up. I think it is an on. It makes most sense to be an on. Good. Rather than off.
And with that, I'll second the
thank you very much.
Motion to approve.
But I do like it that people do read the minutes. It has been moved and seconded. Colleagues, can I take it with that correction of that typo that these can be approved? Do Councillors Quirk and Redrup agree? Councillors Quirk and Redrup, can I take it that you do agree to the minutes? Yeah, thank you. I will just do my signing bit now. Thank you, colleagues. So item 3 is any declarations of interest. Councillor Jarman?
I should declare an interest as chair of the pension committee.
Any other colleagues declaring an interest? If one does occur to you as we go through our discussions, just alert me straight away and I'll take that. So, but thank you. Otherwise, we can move to item 4, public question time. Any public questions? you're welcome to ask a question from the public. You are indeed a member of the public, as much as you may be anything else. Okay. So it is a really important point. It's very easy to forget that we are derived from the public, not separate from the public. So, that little bit of pedantry over, I'll move on to item 5, which is reports of the external auditor, Ernst & Young. We have Mr. Sutra and yes, Mr. Jones is there as well online. So, so you have those at pages 11 to 48 for the Isle of Wight Pension Fund, and then pages 49 to 100 on the completion report on the Isle of Wight Council. But I'll hand over to Mr. Suter for any remarks he wishes to make at this stage.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning, members. So as the Chairman said, our update this morning covers both the Pension Fund and the Council audits, and that's for the financial year 23-24, starting on page 11 of your agenda pack. I'm not going to make a lengthy presentation on these reports in any detail. Chairman's already mentioned you have a long agenda, and the reports are on today's agenda for your information, given that we have signed our audit reports on both the Pension Fund and the Council, and we met the backstop requirements for the Council's audits, Council's accounts to be published by the 28th of February of last month. So members will recall that the chairman of the committee had delegated authority to approve the council's accounts, including those of the pension fund, which was agreed at previous meetings. We issued the 2 reports that are in today's papers back in February, and we met with the chairman on the 19th of February to run through the content and provide the opportunity for any questions. Subsequently, we then signed the audit reports later that day, giving an unqualified opinion on the pension fund accounts and disclaiming the council's accounts for that year. That's in accordance with the previous updates we've given the committee, so no major issues or particular matters that I wanted to bring to the committee's attention this morning. So that's all I wanted to say, and happy to take any questions if the members did have some.
Thank you, Mr. Suter. Just to reiterate, yes, indeed, we did have that meeting on the 19th of February. That's very, very helpful. And I did indeed, you gave me delegated authority in collaboration with the Section 151 officer, and obviously I exercised that delegated authority that you had given me at your last meeting. But anyway, colleagues, questions to Ernst & Young on this, if any? Councillor John.
The only question I have is about the fee basis, which is shows a very dramatic increase in fees. I know these get resolved by PSAA at the end of the day, but I wondered if you could speak somewhat to the fairly dramatic increase in fees which is proposed in them.
Yes, so Councillor Jarman, in 23-24 we start the new contract with public sector audit appointments, and it's their responsibility to set the fees, and in their marketing of that contract they have determined the fact that audit fees needed to increase significantly to become in line with the trends in the sort of private market and any other element of sector of auditing. So that is the key reason behind the increase in fees. The one aspect I have to say is, given the fact that we have undertaken differing amounts of work, particularly for the council, PSAA will be determining the final fee based upon what we've undertaken in good faith before the guidelines around the backstop came in, and they are yet to determine both fees for 22-23 and 23-24. So they are not the final fees, and we will update that as soon as we are informed of what those final fees would be.
Just a supplementary then, Chair. So on the ones which relate specifically to the pension fund, the fee increase for the basic code work has changed from 22 to 71,000. It seemed a very large increase. Is that in line with the scale fee increase which PSAA are suggesting?
Yes, it is.
I think you have a clear answer there. We are subject to the PSSA arrangements, of course, on all of these things. The key thing is we must hope that that they are properly reflecting in the fees evaluation for the work that is being done. And see, we've heard in other meetings of the extra work that external audit is requiring these days. Colleagues, any other questions on these two reports? Otherwise, they are here. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Councillor Quirk.
Very encouraging to have the unreserved approval of the account. On the pension fund audit differences, there was a £30 million restatement of sort of cash. Can you just explain what happened? I'm not close. I mean, some people here are close to the pension fund. I'm not. So just to understand what happened, whether that's totally appropriate and normal, and whether, if it's not, what we're doing about it.
So essentially, Councillor, this was effectively a timing difference. The investment manager called in one of the payments, and the council passed that payment over. It was classified in investment assets, but actually, as at the balance sheet date, it hadn't been invested. It was still a cash, so the cash had been passed over. So it was literally classification in your accounts, moving from one classification to another. Subsequently, after that balance sheet date, it will be invested, but the net asset statement is a snapshot of what happens on that date. So no particular issues to worry about for the members, and the money will have been then invested in the required asset as it went through, and that's what you'll see in the next year's accounts. So yeah, and again, nothing particularly to worry about.
Thank you very much, and I will second the motion.
Okay. Councillor John.
Not wishing to hurry my colleague. So I just had one question. I think I raised it last time, and I don't recall what the answer was. I think somebody was going to find out, or that it was wrong. On page 58, under the PFI contract, it was noted that there's been a significant change in the PFI accounting during the current year. And I seem to remember asking what that was and expecting an answer. I don't remember getting the answer. I wonder if somebody could clarify what the significant change in the PFI accounting model actually is.
Mr. Downham, hopefully will be able to help us on this one.
Yeah, I think we went through it last time, in that there was no change in this period in the PFI accounting model. We were potentially investigating a new method of doing it, but we continued with the existing one at this time.
So this should be altered to say to take that out then, should it? Because we're declaring that there was a significant change, and what we're now hearing is that there wasn't.
So we don't intend to change our report, Councillor Jarman. The risks reflected the knowledge at the time of planning. If we had completed the audit, we would have noted that down in accordance with Councillor Downer's explanation. But the risks were identified at the time of planning, when it was still being considered.
Any other questions, colleagues?
Chair, we're left therefore with an anomaly, with a document which has a known error in it. I wonder how you'd like to proceed with that.
It is the report of Ernst & Young. They have, Mr. Suter has just indicated that he's not looking to change the report. I think it's reasonable that we are aware of it, but does it have any material effect on going forwards? Do you believe that it does, that it would lead to something substantive?
I don't believe it changes anything substantively. It's just extraordinarily unusual in corporate history to have a known anomaly presented for approval.
Otherwise, well, given what Mr. Suter said, they're not looking to change the report. It is based on something that they understood at the time, I presume. So otherwise, we are. It is presented for our information. So are we content that we've heard enough upon this for us to note and move on? Councillor Quirk, is there a question, Councillor Quirk? Or sorry. So I are we content to move on? Otherwise, we'll note this report. Councillor Redrup.
Sorry to, I might be a little bit ignorant on this subject, but I'm stuck on the scale between 2023 and 24, that the significant difference of fees. My colleague here just says to me this was proposed by the government, but that is, you know, quite a significant jump. What do the taxpayer gets for that money? Or am I reading this wrong? From 22,000 to 71,000? That's, could someone explain that to me?
In a nutshell, I guess we would have to get some form of information that PSAA sent us, because they are the body through which we our fees are set. Am I misunderstanding that in any way? From an external audit point of view, could Mr. Suter, so I've asked Mr. Suter, from an external audit point of view, what do you think that PSAA had in mind when they revised these fees?
So my understanding is that PSAA revised the fees to represent the current state of the audit market. Costs have gone up significantly over the last few years, and the previous scale fees did not represent those cost increases. So therefore, in order to make sure that every council had an appointed auditor, PSAA effectively had to raise the fees. That is my understanding. PSAA publish information on the scale fee every year, and so by year you can look at both their consultation and their final published fee processes. So that's all available on their website if you're looking for further information on this matter. But the setting of the scale fee is for PSAA to determine.
And of course, taking account of that fee, that would be something that we will have taken account of in setting the council's budget, as we did only, what, 2 weeks ago. So we know that there are issues around external audit. There are market pressures. Markets do have pressures. It is a significant additional cost to us. I suggest that what this council might want to do is to see if there is any other means by which it could be securing that service. But ultimately you get what you pay for. If we are getting what we should be getting from the payment for the actual fee, and I recognise that that's to be finally determined, isn't it? So, Councillor Jarman.
For the benefit of other councillors, Councillor Redrup included, I'll refer you to page 80 of the report. Give people a few seconds to flick to that page. And you'll see on that page the scale fee is also not only for the pension fund but for the council changed with an unmodest change, which is from 112k to 326k. Also, we've taken on an additional line item, which is the harbour accounts, and so whilst I probably shouldn't comment on the other one because it's a similar scale of increase, a tripling of costs as we have with the pension fund, although it seems to be quite a lot of money. I wondered whether the harbour account 6,000 is being cross-charged to the harbours themselves, or whether it's a cost now being borne by the council, i.e. the council taxpayers. Thank you.
Is there somebody who can answer specifically on that harbour point? I think the broader question of the fees is perhaps something that this committee could visit in terms of understanding how this works at some point, maybe informally between now and our next meeting in July, because yes, it is not nice to see such a big increase, but there has been a body that manages this that has made that assessment, and we buy into doing so. But somebody on the harbour side first, and then Councillor Christensen.
I think we'd have to take away and investigate where it gets coded. But as far as I'm aware, from EY's report. It was previously part of the council's fees. It's just been separated out for presentation.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to confirm that although we're discussing this, this isn't something we can challenge. Is it? This is a set fee, or is there a mechanism to do that?
If I remember rightly, we don't have to go through the PSAA approach. I think we can procure directly. Am I wrong in that? Somebody?
We can do, but our approach and our contract we signed up to is with the PSSAA. There are many complications and additional work to go through and procure your own audit, external audit, and PSAA represents the best value for money and is the common approach in the industry.
That was certainly my understanding, but yes, I'm glad I wasn't wrong in thinking that it is possible to procure it separately. But I think there is a reason why bodies exist that manage an overall thing. It is about getting the best value for money. This may not feel like the best value of money. This council can explore that, but we are subject to it because we have contracted with PSAA to do this for us. So, but I think if we had something between now and July where we could understand exactly what is happening there, that could be very helpful. Are we content with that? You smile at me, Councillor Joe.
I do, Chair. I mean, if there are a number of us here who in businesses, but my colleagues on every side of me, in fact, and I'm sure if the cost of almond paste went up from 111k to 326 in one jump, most people would balk at that. I think it's unusual that we, both in the pension fund scale fee and in the council scale fee, have such radical changes to the number without it being brought out and highlighted to the committee. I would have expected something of that magnitude, because if I add the two together, you know, I've got something in the region of 300, there's VAT to add on top of that. So I've got 360,000 of additional costs layered in here without it being highlighted as an exceptional event. And I think that's quite a lot of money. To be I won't use the word hidden, but to be unhighlighted in two sections of the document. It's a lot of money, especially given the finances of the council at the moment.
Certainly, it's my recollection. That's always in these reports.
Yeah.
Am I misremembering that this? No, I'm not. It has been there. It's interesting that it's getting raised now. Of course, we've now got a cite something.
Yeah. So, Councillor Jarman as well, with these figures were in our planning reports for the year when we presented the audit plans for both audits. I think I recall that was back in May. I may be incorrect on the precise dates. And we put in the fees every year as part of our independence communications. So in no way are we hiding this from members.
Well, language is always, we should always be careful. It is not hidden. It has been there all along. I think what's important is that as we look forward, particularly as we change our governance structures, so that there will be a committee. So of course, we're not the ones negotiating that contract. Ultimately, it'll be through full council and through its policy and finance and resources committee. Maybe that is the place where they should be, through the work that they do on developing a budget for next year. That they should look very carefully at this, but it feels to me that it is something that we only have direct control of if we were to exit from a contract or not renew a contract PSAA, and then bring upon ourselves the other risks of not being able to procure something as good value for money. But all of us who have been through, I'd hate to use the analogy of just our personal lives, but the last few years have seen the impacts of inflation just generally. There are times when there are adjustments. That doesn't excuse us from looking very carefully at this figure, but there are times when there are adjustments. So we will need to be very alive in July's committee meeting, or those of us who are maybe members of that committee, to what's there, but particularly those who will be on the new PF&R committee, to have that understanding of things. But Councillor Redrup, and I really would like to move us on because I'm aware of the pressures of our agenda.
Just one last question then. Regarding this coming year, what are the fees? Are they going to jump up in the similar sort of percentage for 24, 25? Do we have that information? Because 22, 23 to 23, 24 is an alarming increase. As Councillor Jarman pointed out, I'm in business and that is way more than I would expect. And I'm under pressure from costs from all areas at the moment in my business. But even so, that is quite alarming. So what is next year's costs going to be? Do we know that? Do we have an estimation?
What is
Sorry if I'm coming across a bit ignorant on this subject, but it's, to me, it just.
Anybody have an indication of the scale fee for the next time around?
Councillors, I don't have that figure to hand right at this moment. As I say, it is published on the PSAA's website annually. The increase is not of a similar scale of increase, because say that the scale of the increase was due to the new contractual arrangement. So 24-25, our next audit is under the same contract as 23-24. So there's not a significant jump up in the same way as between 22-23 and 23-24.
Thank you for that, Councillor John.
Just one final thing. Can I ask the Assistant Director of Finance, who noted that we were in a contract, how long that contract requires us to remain with the same vendor or under the same scheme? Is it an annual one or is it multi-year?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can't remember. So I'll get back to you on that one.
I think we've given that a good airing. There's some thoughts ahead for both this committee and for the Policy and Finance and Resources Committee, which will be taking over in May in terms of budget management and development. Are you content otherwise to note that we have received these reports for information? Thank you very much. I'll move us on. Thank you, Mr. Jones, for your attendance. I think you may want to stay with us if you wish, but you may also have other pressing things to do, so you may go as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Which moves us on now to the internal audit progress report. That's from pages 101 onwards. So we receive and consider the report of the Chief Internal Auditor. So, Ms. Goodwin, is there anything you wish to highlight to us?
Thank you, Chair. No, I don't wish to highlight anything. I am going to assume individuals, I know it's a huge pack, that you have read the pack, so I'm happy to answer any questions on the progress report that you have in front of you.
Colleagues, any questions upon this report? Councillor Jarman? Oh, Councillor Quirk. I'll take Councillor Quirk first, and then
just one in the appendix on page 155. It's picking up about auditing the savings against the budget savings that are being requested and making sure. I think it would be good if that actually also investigated the possibility of overspends in other places, because the savings only work if people keep to their budgets.
Councillor, can I come on to that? Because that will be the next paper.
Yes, I think that was 155, wasn't it? Page 155. So, Councillor Jarman.
Yes, Chair. So a few questions on this paper, but coming back to it, I have to go back quite a long way in my thing here. Page 121, where we have children's services. I'm very pleased we've got Ashley here today. Hello, Ashley. We seem to have here a chart which is alarmingly orange, but thankfully none of them red. I'm just a little bit confused by the fact that we have a number which are rated as orange, which is the high category, only one of them medium, and yet the recommendation that comes out is yellow, which is reasonable assurance after those follow-up measures. It seems to me that children's services, anecdotally and practically, seems to be a fairly high risk element within the council at the moment. And I wondered on what basis it had been rated as it has.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. The areas which are numbered, where you say that there are 4 high, 1 medium, were the original ratings that were given when we first undertook this piece of work. This is a follow-up review, and if you notice in the end column, there is a narrative that says whether the exception or the risk exposure, whether it's in progress, whether it's been closed and verified. You'll also notice that, for example, under the virtual school, we have that's closed unverified, i.e. that risk exposure, the service has said they've undertaken all relevant actions that they had agreed to, and it's that will influence the overall opinion which is noted above. So when we originally performed the work, there were 4 high, 1 medium. It had an overall rating as limited assurance. When we've come along to perform the follow-up work, there has been movement in the vast majority of areas, or there is a drop in expenditure processed via a particular means, which is why we're able to give it an improved overall assurance rating. So it is to note the progress.
And I take it the same would be true on the direct contract and supervision chart, would it? Which is page 122.
Yes.
We don't, are we expecting the cabinet member for children's services to deal with any of those matters today? I don't know.
Is there a matter that you think you wish him to respond to?
I was going to direct some of the questions that relate to children's services to him, but if he's not here, I'm sure Elizabeth, perhaps from her analysis, can continue to fill that in.
Do you wish, the director is here though, so do you wish to raise those questions?
No, I'll just carry on chronologically through the paper, I think, at this stage, rather than jumping too far. The next one I was going, do you want me to carry on, Chair?
By all means.
So the next one's on page 124. And this is the homelessness, and the particular reference here I had was about placements and care. It may be that the officer, Ashley Whitaker, is at the back, is able to deal with some of the children and care issues. But I think we've all been very concerned by the cost basis which is being included in the current finances, and perhaps in some of the media articles about this. I just wanted to give a chance to air that a little bit here, particularly the out of area ones. I understand there are some measures afoot to reduce those costs over the next financial year and deal with those out of area issues. I'm just giving the officer a chance to respond here, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jarman, for raising this very important point. So the needs of children on the island remain very high, and in some cases are actually higher than they were previously. And this does present challenges with finding appropriate homes for them. It is the case that we have a number of children who are currently living on the mainland, where if we had sufficient and appropriate homes for them on the island, they would be on the island. We have an external consultant who's been working within the directorate since the very beginning of November, who is reviewing all the homes we have for children, whether they be residential homes or whether they be homes within foster families. And they're also looking at the children who we currently have responsibility for, who we care for, and forecasting the type of home that we need for those children, not just now, but in the years to come. The draft or the findings of that work will be published in what's called a sufficiency strategy, and we expect that to be out in the next month or so. And that will articulate not just the changing needs of children, but also any gaps we have with our local access to homes for them. And on the back of that, we will then be considering what opportunities we need to pursue to develop local homes for children on the island, so that where appropriate, children with needs can be accommodated, with these sorts of needs can be accommodated on the island, and in some cases actually brought back to the island from the mainland. That is our intention. And I guess there's two elements to this. First of all, it's about meeting the needs of children. So one of the downsides of children having to move to the mainland at the moment might be, for example, that the only source of stability, or one of the few sources of stability they have in their lives, might be their school. And of course, if they can't live on the island, they also need to change school. And so that would be not something that we would want to have to happen just as a result of them not having anywhere to live here. But the second thing, which Councillor Jarman also raised, is the aspect of cost. And it is the case that nationally, there's a very significant shortage of residential provision and foster provision for children in care of local authorities across the country. And that means that there has been quite significant increase in the costs of these placements. And we see, and we have seen in recent months, higher costs, so significant inflation coming through. And of course, as we approach the end of this financial year, we're receiving lots and lots of requests from independent providers for above inflation fee increases, driven not just by costs to do with, for example, the workforce, but also to do with national insurance rises, etc. And actually, if there are opportunities to bring some of this provision in-house, it may give us the opportunity to have a better control of the costs of delivering these homes. Thank you.
Is that helpful, Councillor Jarman?
Very helpful, yes, thank you, Chair. My last one on this related to page 131, which was grounds maintenance and other costs associated with that. I'm very happy to see, I think we have Tasha sitting over there. I can just about see her behind Kerry. Hello, Tasha. This was an area that didn't seem to was still left with a limited assurance level. And I wonder if we could have some idea of what was actually, rather than having these words failure to maximise, etc., in a long column, if we could have some idea of what mitigation measures were underway to change this in the future. I don't know whether that would come from Tasha or from Elizabeth, but happy to hear from either on it.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. In terms of the ground maintenance contract, the audit report was a fantastic snapshot in time to give us a clear view of the changes that needed to be implemented to make it a more robustly managed contract. As such, the contract manager has had significant training in contract management principles, and we have now set into place very clear structures for weekly and quarterly meetings with agendas and minutes, so that the subjects are not just being discussed and then walked away from, but we have a clear progression in place within that contract and expectations of the contractor to make sure that all of the pricing and all of the work carried out is carried out to specification and within budget.
Could you, just one final point on it, could you give an idea of what the actual council spend is on this area roughly at the moment? I don't need an exact figure, just a rough indication.
Yep, for the coming contract year, it's just around £850,000.
Any other questions from colleagues? So we will. I'm just nothing more to add. Is there anything more to add from you from your end? So we are receiving your report. Specifically, I haven't got the recommendation in front of me. This is the problem with flicking backwards and forwards. So do we note at this point? We note the report at this point. Thank you. Those in favour of noting, please show. Yeah, I will take that. It is noted, and thank you, and thank you to my colleagues for asking some searching questions. That's the role of this committee, in seeking assurance that our insurance is assured. If I can torture those words. That takes us on to item 7, which is the internal audit plan for 2025-26, pages 145 onwards. Ms. Goodwin again.
Yes, Chair. In actual fact, in relation to this report, if I could draw your attention to a couple of areas. The first one of which is there's an amendment to the plan, which is page. Bear with. It would be page 153. 153. Included in the plan is an audit titled Housing Benefits that will actually be amended to payroll. Housing benefits, whilst it is a larger area of expenditure, it is subject to external verification, i.e. the grant subsidy has to be verified. So I am going to replace that and reconsider looking at housing benefit in future years. The other areas, though, that I would like to draw your attention to is attached to the audit report is the audit charter. There are significant changes in relation to the rules that the internal audit team have to abide by. It has been public sector internal audit standards up until the end of March of this year, and that will actually transfer across to the global internal audit standards. So there has been some amendments to the report, the vast majority of which for the charter will be included in the annual opinion. So there is enhanced information that I need to share with you in the audit opinion report, which will be July, so it'll be later on this year. In effect, you are deemed as being internal audits board. So when we refer to the board, we're talking to the Audit and Governance Committee. And some of the changes that I wanted to bring your attention to are noted on page 162.25. Towards the end, I've included that whilst I meet with the chair on a regular basis, just the two of us, or maybe the three of us, when Grant comes along, I need to sit down periodically with the committee with no other senior management being present. So I've included that within the charter. I've also included it in the charter on page 163, item C. I have to coordinate any assurance work that is performed that is by external parties. So that would include the likes of Ofsted, the Housing Safety Inspectorate, any party where they may perform any type of external verification assessment on the authority. I need to, where practical, coordinate our efforts. But I also need to keep you informed, which is why it'll be in the annual opinion, as to where that assurance has been placed and why that assurance has been placed. On page 165, under section 151, who has the responsibility for the provision of internal audit, I've added under C that we have to kind of communicate, but it's more formally the human and technological resources that are available to internal audit. Under page 166, D and I, they are both additional areas added, and that is because that is wording from the global standards. You have been championing internal audit and we very much appreciate it, but we have to be explicit and include it within our charter. And I have to share with you if there is any resource implications. A lot of the other areas that are contained within the global standards are actually already things that we've had in place under the public sector internal audit standards. But it's just to highlight a couple of those points. As I said, it will be mirrored, the bulk of which in the annual opinion. In relation to the plan that you have in front of you, where the charter supports the plan, the areas that are included have been risk assessed. I envisage on a quarterly basis that I'll still go through and assess whether there's any significant changes, and in which case there may be a movement within the plan. I've deliberately not included grants or follow-up reviews. I named them because sometimes things change throughout the year, but I will report all audit activities to you as and when the work has been completed. And Councillor Quirk, I think your question was in relation to this particular paper. I will leave it there, but if you'd like to ask your question again, I will be able to answer it for you.
Thank you for that. So Councillor Quirk, you did indicate something on page 155, I think it was, that you had a question.
No, well, it's the point I made before is that it's important. There's no point making savings in some budget heads if people overspend in other ones, and you need to look at both of them and to keep control of the budgets. And historically, we seem to be better at controlling the savings than we do at controlling the spendings. And certainly, as of May onwards, as I've alluded to before, there'll be a Policy and Finance and Resources Committee, which will be able to keep an eye on those things, for want of a better phrase, and to establish the extent to which there is control in both directions. We are acutely aware, though, all of us have just been through a budget setting process where we're acutely aware of the uncontrollable extra expenditures that come our way because of how much we are that we have vulnerable people, but that doesn't stop us from seeking to control even where there are things we can't. Some things that are deemed uncontrollable, I disagree, are uncontrollable, and that's why I would like internal audit to be keeping an eye on them, because, and I've identified a couple of specific examples, but not for sort of general debate, public. But thank you. And certainly that would be a particular, well, all of those service committees should be having in mind that, but particularly the Policy, Finance and Resource Committee, and obviously any ongoing role for this committee post May the 21st. But I'll ask a question first, if otherwise. Just on with regard to the charter, I think you said something there about the capacity side of things. If you were asked to give an opinion at this moment in time, what would you say of the capacity to deliver your audit functions?
The audit function is aligned to the risk exposure, and so I am comfortable that we have sufficient resource to enable that opinion to be given throughout the course of the year. Obviously, things change throughout the year, and I feel comfortable coming back to the committee and raising accordingly if I think that there is an impact on those resources that we have in place. You are the smaller unitary that we have, and the resource level that we have against your plan is appropriate as long as your risk dynamic does not change dramatically.
Thank you for that. One other thing, just to note, that I think you obviously, we do have very useful meetings, yourself and Mr. Newton with myself as chair, but extending that to the committee. So we will have to get something into diaries ahead of the next meeting of the committee, always having in mind that may need to be after annual council, because there may be changes in that committee's membership. So but we'll have that in mind. Otherwise, colleagues, questions on this particular report? Councillor Jarman.
First of all, thank you to Elizabeth for being preemptive on that. She's actually addressed almost a half a page of my questions already, which is very good. So the first one I had was about artificial intelligence, which is on page 153 as well. And I wondered if you were aware whether we were actually using artificial intelligence systems at the moment within the council. And importantly, following on from the chair's question, whether you believe that we have the skill set necessary to deal with artificial intelligence as an audit function. As distinct from the quanta in terms of number of audit resources, this is about the skill set of the resources we have to address that particular issue.
Just for clarity, Councillor Jarman, do you mean within the audit service or within the organisation?
Within the organisation.
Thank you. And Councillor Quirk, I have made a note of your concerns, so we will encompass them within the audit report and piece of work for the budgetary control stuff. Councillor Jarman, I'm going to hand you over to Geraint Newton, who, and he knew I was going to do that. He knows technology is really not my forte, so I'm going to move quickly.
Yes, we have access to artificial intelligence. We've got the free license for Microsoft Copilot. Now that is a version of Copilot where the data does not leave the organisation, so it is secure. These AI audits, we're proposing to do them across the councils in the audit partnership. They're going to be quite high-level reviews, and it's really focused on making sure the basic controls are in place. Not at this council, but what we have observed at other councils is increasingly vendors are saying, oh, our system can do AI, and it's starting to creep in. So what we want to make sure is that all of the councils have got the correct controls in place to manage that process. At the moment, the line which most councils are taking is that the corporate solution is Microsoft Copilot. If you want to use AI, use Microsoft Copilot, but it's the audits are around just making sure that we've got the mechanisms in place to control how staff are using AI. The biggest risk is around the potential data leakage.
And does that include data which is coming into the organisation from third parties who are using AI platforms? And part B to that is, does it include data which we export from the council system to platforms which incorporate AI management, for example, the BI platform?
If I take the first part of that question, so this is data coming into the council. I will make sure I include that in the scope of the audit, and I'll make a note of it now. Could you repeat the second part of the question?
Yeah, the second one is data which we export from the council to populate third-party platforms, for example, the BI system.
So, as far as I'm aware, the Copilot system we're using, no data leaves the actual council's control.
So the data, we do share data to the BI.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you're talking about data which was being generated using AI, then going into another system. Yeah, that would be included in the audit, because it's about making sure that staff have got the skills to use AI appropriately. And I know Mrs. Goodwin has been very, very strict with our use of AI, and to make sure that it's always sense checked. And it's a tool, it's not a replacement for staff.
Thank you. I know there are several of us who already use AI in one way or another, particularly on documents. Don't we, Andrew?
We do indeed, Councillor Jarman. And I think you may recall I queried Ernst & Young when they had reference to the AI usage a couple of meetings back. It is really important to understand they are tools that can lead to a more effective and efficient working, but they come with risks as well, and that for me there are two risks. One that is the loss loss of data, or data leakage, I think was the term Steve Newton used. The other is the failure to pick up that the AI has hallucinated some opinion on that data or whatever, or whatever other way in which it's being used, because whilst we may be thinking about AI use on numbers, AI isn't particularly good at writing words, and but we need to be very careful that what it writes is actually truthful. It would be very embarrassing at the very least, and I have experience, not myself, but a close contact of somebody finding that a reference that they had put in a report was completely fabricated by the AI. At the moment, though, they can't do maths very well, most of them, I've discovered, which means people like myself and perhaps Councillor Jarman and others with the ability to manipulate the odd mathematical symbol, we're not out of our roles just yet. But anyways, it is really important that that's in there and understood from the very start, that we're getting that right. Councillor Jarman, do you want to continue?
Yes, so on that point, it is worth noting that I've recently found it myself that documents which have been AI sense checked or AI manipulated or AI generated do leave AI tags within the documents. And those tag links can be quite enlightening as to original content of documents. So it's worth noting that if a document is generated within the council machine, which is then reviewed with an AI platform to paraphrase or simplify or remove duplications, etc., one may believe that the tagging information within it is not present, but it is quite possible to discover the tagging information and to reveal data that was previously not known. That doesn't become such a big issue, I would suggest, within the council machine itself, but it may well, if we use that document associated with a committee and we put it into the public component of ModGov. So just a little bit of knowledge transfer there. How you audit that, I have no idea at all, but there we are. The next question I had was about the implications that we have in terms of the introduction of the Code of Ethics, which I think are coming in back now. And I wondered what the implications for both audit and for resources were regarding their introduction.
Right, me, Councillor Jarman, which change of Code of Ethics?
So I was just wondering what the implications would be of that Code of Ethics coming in. I know that it's something that we're adhered to as a local authority and we're signed up to. I just wondered, is that something that will fall under the monitoring officer going forward to monitor, or is there some other group that would be monitoring those issues internally, and indeed even how?
It's part of governance, isn't it? So it is under the remit of any governance type activities, although obviously it's clearly for the whole of the council. So it is something I think the monitoring officer, we certainly have to be very mindful with all of the work we perform. You'll notice obviously on our charter, we've got the Code of Ethics that are contained within ours. So obviously any significant changes or updates we need to be mindful of. Whether we would actually audit any impact of that, we would consider it on a regular basis, i.e. annually, unless risks significantly change. But beyond that, that's something for the organisation to be carrying forward to make certain it adheres to any and all significant changes.
Thank you. So it would come under audit and governance as a committee, but be dealt with and monitored by the monitoring officer specifically.
Well, the monitoring officer has a specific role within the Constitution, and governance sits there, but it also sits with the chief exec, with all directors, with Section 151 officer. But the one that takes the significant lead is usually your monitoring officer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions, colleagues, on Ms. Goodwin's report? Councillor Church.
A1 AI does worry me slightly. We have lists and lists and lists of risk averse for virtually every other item that comes through the council. I mean, pensions, when I look at the risk averse register there, I almost give up. Are we doing anything about assessing the risk of AI? You have mentioned a couple of things. Now, I'm not particularly good at IT, but it really does worry me whether we could be hacked in any way by AI, because things could be changed or altered. So is there any form of risk averse being put into place, or does it exist? Thank you.
I think Ms. Downer can help on that, because it is getting into the risk register side of things. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Yes, you'll notice on the risk register that there is one that we call, I believe, cyber security. But that cyber security would include all kinds of ICT and other risks that would potentially affect the council in one way or another, or would put us at risk of any cyber incident that we'd then have to respond to. So it's on the risk register. I can't recall, without reading it right now, whether AI in its specifics is mentioned within that, but it would be part of that whole risk assessment procedure that the ICT team undertake.
Oh, okay.
So there's also the issue that we as a council, that our data is being used by AI platforms as well. So it's not, what I'm doing is drawing a governance distinction and indeed a risk management distinction between the inbound and the intra-council issues that AI faces, but also the fact that our data is being parsed real time by the AI platforms. And we know that because if one goes on into Chrome, launches Google, and does a search on there of anything to do with the council, you will find that the AI system within Google, as of about 2 months ago, has started shifting out huge quantities of Isle of Wight Council data, and will now give you a response using extracts of Isle of Wight Council data from ModGov and other publications. So it's not, I don't know how to phrase it, but it's not simply an inbound or an intra thing. It is an external thing that we are exposing data which AI platforms are parsing and taking. And just to be aware of that. I don't know what risk that gives to the organisation, because the data is nominally public anyway. It's simply an additional exposure channel. And whether the AI platforms correctly represent that data depends in some ways on how we decide to tag it. And at the moment, a lot of the data that we publish in our documents is not tagged for AI platforms to correctly pick up, is it? And the is it at the end, sorry.
I can't answer that. I'm not IT, I'm afraid, so I couldn't answer that. What I can say in relation to one of the requirements, for example, of Power BI, which we use for some of our reporting, is there are only a certain number of licenses that are allowed to publish data outside of the council system, and those are really well managed and maintained. So on that side of the platform, we've got those controls in place. The license that generally people have doesn't allow them to publish that information outside of our council network. So only those that have been specifically trained, have the right license, and are publishing the data we've agreed they can, would be able to do that in any way.
I don't think Google is respecting that then. I think they're just taking the data anyway and using it. I don't think they have a license to take our data from ModGov, but they're clearly doing it.
If it's published on ModGov, then Google and anyone else will be able to access it and do what they wish with it.
So Claire Shander, who is online, has put her hand up for this one. Claire, can I?
Thank you, Chairman. And sorry to interject into the meeting, but obviously some of this feature of AI is very technical in nature. So I was going to suggest, if it might be helpful to the committee, that we ask our IT service manager to provide either Councillor Jarman or others, the committee, if it's helpful, with some more detailed explanation of how these issues are managed within the council. As Mr. Downer said, that there is a a strong approach to cybersecurity, in particular within the council. And I know that there are considerations around AI as well. Like most people, I'm not technically minded either, but I know that somebody like Roger Brown would be able to give more comfort and assurance around some of these issues, and to assist with understanding of what the council's arrangements are.
Thank you for that. My feeling is that Councillor Jarman's exploring something really very important here, and that we do need to, as a committee, understand as much as we can around this, but also I think obviously we're not on the risk register side of things, but there are elements relating to risk as to the extent to which this needs to be written in clearly into the risk register. But first, I'm not sure I understand. Councillor Jarman is far more technically competent than I am on these things. But I would very much welcome a briefing from Mr. Brown, I think, on that, and those who wish to do that. So if we could arrange briefing for this committee in the first instance around the use and risks and the policies that are in place, that would, I think, would be very helpful. And then I think we would flag up that it is something that for those who are considering risk, and the risk registers at all their various levels, at the extent to which this needs to be written in and understood. It's an organisational risk, isn't it? It's not particularly one area. And I think I would also want to be certain that we have policies that somebody who might just decide, I know organisationally I'm meant to use Copilot, but I much prefer using something else, I'll just go off and do that. They don't, or they cannot use some other platform, which would expose us to an outer policy risk as well. So would you agree with me on that?
I would, Chair. I would attempt to steer it away from being a conversation limited to security, because for me, security is an aspect of it, but it's much more important about data and data integrity. Those are within the AI field at the moment, as you alluded to yourself with accuracy. It's much more about data and integrity of the data that we use, and which others extract and use of us, and how they present it, which in itself depends on how we tag the data for them to use. And I suspect, looking through our documents on ModGov at the moment, we are not AI tagging any of our documents that we publish.
With that in mind, are there any other questions on this, Councillor Redrock?
It's quite interesting that you brought up that staff would be going off and using their own computers to help do the reports and works that they're undertaken to do. And in that case, they're using AI personally to help them with that work. That clearly is a breach of security, isn't it? And what you was highlighting about data being tagged or not tagged outside of the council. What controls do we have internally with the council in making sure that we don't do that? Even in my little business, we're already using AI. So, and I've seen the failure of AI when we're looking at data. It's in its infancy, isn't it? It's not quite there yet. And to be relying on it seems troublesome.
So the Chief Executive has her hand up, so I'll bring Wendy in.
Thank you, Chair. And I think there are a number of points that have been made this morning that we need to tie back to some of the internal controls we have within the council around downloading different forms of software onto our computers, introducing devices through our computers, and we have a full suite of internal policy documents that very strongly control what individual members of staff can or cannot do. For example, we have very strong control around downloading software that's not properly procured or commissioned by the council. We have policies in relation to linking other devices and personal devices to the work that we are doing. And we have a whole suite of policy, training and understanding building around corporate approach to use of Copilot in particular, how it's used and what it's used for, and the issues that you've raised in relation to properly understanding what it is and what it does, and therefore how we should then use it if we have, for example, put a document through Copilot to find a summary, is set out in all the training that we provide to individuals. So I hope that gives you, as a committee, more reassurance and more assurance that we have the right suite of policies and proposals in place. But of course, all of those things are also things that Roger can pick up with you in his briefing.
I think your last point there, Chief Executive, is that we satisfy ourselves through that briefing to start with. I think what you've laid out is helpful, but Councillor Redrup is quite right. People could be tempted to use unauthorized software in some way or another, particularly if they're using their own device in some way or another. It is in its infancy, but all technologies start in their infancy and they ultimately become part of our lives. And the cautions, we learn to live with those things, but securities build up around those things as well. Doesn't mean things can't go wrong. Those of us who love a spreadsheet spreadsheets have been around for decades now in terms of their computerized format, but you can still make a mistake with a spreadsheet very easily. So the thing even though I'm concerned about how we make sure we use AI properly, human error still remains my biggest my biggest concern. That simply humans that can make mistakes in their use of tools. So colleagues, if we have covered, I think we covered this very well, and I think that through Councillor Jarman's questioning in particular, picked up a very important point around AI. Otherwise, the report requires us to consider whether or not we approve this plan. I will move from the chair that we do approve the plan. We've heard about the change in one of the items to payroll, but with that change in mind, are you prepared to approve the plan? If so, please show. Anybody not approving or otherwise? No, it is approved. You may work to that. Thank you very much. That for those of us who just love a good geek out, I think that was a nice little session. But right, so we are on to item 8, I believe, financial regulations, page 177 onwards. Receive and consider the report of the Director of Finance. Ms. Hubbleday, are you going to sort of lead, or Mr. Down is going to do that?
Right, so large piece of work was completed during 2024 to bring the financial regs up to date, and that was approved by this committee last April. So part of that review included a version 2, a second appendix, which was in readiness for the change in the governance system. This update is primarily based on that piece of work, so it's bringing it into place in readiness for May. In addition to that piece of work that was done last year, we've also made some updates in relation to the Procurement Act. So we've liaised with the procurement team in quite a bit of detail, and they've assisted with where it impacts throughout the financial regs. So we've incorporated that change as well. In the report on page 178, there's a short table that sort of tries to pick off where the changes happen through the document, and it's proposed that they will apply from May 2025.
Thank you. Can I thank you for that table? That was very helpful to understand where the changes are and their impact. So that sort of approach was much appreciated by me. Colleagues, any questions on this? As Mr. Lander has indicated, we did give consideration broadly to this last year, and these are updates on that consideration. So, Councillor Jarman.
So I would like to understand what the implications are of that Procurement Act 2023, less so on service I've read what's in there on that issue, but on capital procurement as well. So if we procure something as a capital asset, is that also covered by the Act? For example, if we bid for houses at an auction, I'll give you an example there.
In general, the regulations don't distinguish between the type of expenditure from a procurement point of view. So it would apply to any expenditure.
So any capital asset acquisition that we did would now be covered by that Act, but only from May. Is that right? Or does the fact that the Act coming in 23 cover us already, or is it that we're only adopting the provisions of the Act in May 25?
I'd have to liaise with the procurement lead.
Is Goodwin.
Well, I was going to say it's my understanding. Obviously, we already have in place, at any rate, a number of requirements. This is building upon those requirements. So a little like when I presented in mine, we've already got standards. These are the enhanced standards. It's the same for the procurement. It's a significant amount of the changes are in and around transparency and a number of other bits and pieces. So there's already a very substantial framework in place. This is just building upon them.
Yes, the transparency bits were the ones I looked into, particularly about capital appreciation, and particularly as if we were to embark on, housing or other site acquisitions, etc. So the transparency for that part of that is very important. Something I've personally been quite keen on. I just wanted to find out when it was going to be applied, and the distinction between an Act of 2023 and an implementation date of 2025. Does that mean that we're not compliant with it now, and we will only comply from May 25, or have we already implemented it? In fact, there is no May 25 date for implementation.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was due to be implemented in 2025, the additional requirements, but government placed a hold on that because there had been a change in government when it was originally approved. So we have been complying as we've gone along. The new requirements are not required to be complied with until they are triggered as being, yes, they are in place. So that makes sense? Yeah.
So we will be compliant when the Act becomes an Act,
Yes,
having been delayed. Yeah.
I think there may be some out of committee clarification just to be checked upon on that, just to be sure what has come in. I'm just doing some searching here that how much of it was commencing. So I see some reference to a commencement on 24th February 2025 and stuff like that. So.
Was there not a presentation back in this committee when it was, and the only significant update from that is that it was delayed slightly because government said, hold on a minute, we might want to just rethink. But I can't remember when.
We leave it, Chair, and ask for some written update to confirm
I think we
what
can
the 24th of May date, sorry, 24th of February date was, what came in then and what came in May, and what we are as a council are implementing on each of those dates.
Certainly the LGO is saying that it was to commence on the 24th of February this year, delaying of 4 months from the original go live date, from a statement from the Cabinet Office of 12th September 2024. So let put that outside, and we'll get a proper briefing. Let them please try to Google my way to an answer, or anybody else. But any other questions or comments on this? Councillor Quirk.
Not suggesting we change it for this year, but something to think about and to look at. There's nothing in there about transparency, but there is something in there about avoiding fraud. There has been a lot of lack of transparency over transfer of property assets to the private sector. And I can understand that there's a confidentiality situation when you are negotiating property transfers, and therefore there is a reasonable reason for a confidentiality clause. There's no reason for confidentiality clauses to go beyond the transaction taking place. And I think this should at some stage be looked at in terms of a transparency, and that we don't enter into agreements where we make the council look as if it could be doing things irregularly because we won't tell anyone what we're doing.
I think I understand your point there. I was just looking at this to see that transparency is certainly referenced in the document, but whether it's the kind of transparency that you are seeking, Councillor Quirk.
There've been a number of this, and it's been said that this is a confidential agreement between the parties. And whilst you're negotiating that, that's perfectly reasonable. Once you've completed the negotiations and come to a resolution, it's not. Once you've sold the property, there's no reason why you shouldn't be open and honest about what you sold it for, so that you can see whether you got market value or you didn't. And if you're looking at sort of the potential for fraud, on property transfer of £1 million assets and selling them for 20% below market value is a big potential fraud, much more so than nicking a few paper clips.
I think I understand you more now, Councillor Quirk. Councillor Jarman.
So within the Act, the transparency is very clearly there. And I think that's something that Elizabeth alluded to herself. We do actually cover that on page 180 under bullet point 18. Is it 18? I didn't mark the bullet point. Yes, bullet point 18 on page 180. In terms of a very odd phrase regarding our corporate aims, where it says the financial management activity of the council is in alignment with the aspiration of transparency and disclosure of council finances. A very convoluted sentence, which I think we could find a much easier way of saying we'll be open and direct about it. But I wholeheartedly support here what Councillor Quirk has been saying, that we do need to be open with this information. Respect during the process, but afterwards be open about it. And that is the essence of transparency. And at the end of the day, we are dealing with public assets, and we have an obligation of best value. And what better way can there be to prove best value than being transparent and releasing the information? Thank you.
Councillor Churchman.
The word aspiration should be removed entirety. Secondly, when transactions have been made, how the devil do we know where the money has gone? Where does it show up in the audited accounts? If money is coming into the council, where is it, for goodness sake, and how much is it? I found it incredible that money could be floating around somewhere. Thank you, Chair.
So, yeah, I genuinely take it that the accounts, if you dig into them, you find those monies. Although I know there is at least one instance where it was required to sort of roll it in some way to another heading. Looking at the financial regulations, which is what we have before us, there is a whole section on financial declarations. So this is where I'm slightly struggling as to what is it that people are feeling is not being properly transparent. I'm getting an idea of that, but is it being suggested that we're not meeting those requirements or not? But I think that if we have these financial regulations, which are just being updated, then hopefully we are meeting those financial regulations. Mr. Down, can you help me?
I was just going to make reference to the transparency code. So obviously we have to publish on the council website every item of spend over £500, and that is updated monthly with the whole history of documentation of every transaction.
Because the thing I'm looking at here is section 4.6, which is publication of financial information. Perhaps if there are examples, those could be transmitted, and we could have some insight into what's very specifically it maybe is failing to be published under this in the view of some of my colleagues. But Councillor Redrup, anyway, you put your hand up.
Most of the conversation we've just been having is around property that we're selling, but there is also the other angle where settlements was made around the floating bridge. There was a lot of questions not so long ago about how much, and I don't recall ever being told what that settlement was. So it's not just applying to properties being sold, as the way I look at it.
There certainly was some discussion a while back. I know I'm sure I was the person who brought it up in this committee as to at the time how it was that there was a legal basis for not publishing a certain figure because of the nature of the agreement around the floating bridge. So I think that legal basis is in black and white on a council report somewhere. Which is coming to your point about the floating bridge. There was a point before there, wasn't there? It's floated out of my mind, I'm afraid, Councillor Redrup. Could you sort of remind me, and then I see if we can get an answer on it, unless somebody recalls. What was
my apology? Wherever the floating bridge was, the contractor that made the current floating bridge.
Yeah.
That there was it didn't go to court. It was an outside settlement. We was told. But we've not been privy to what that settlement was, how much.
Yeah. I think that was the point I was making. It was accounted for, but there was an accepted legal basis for why that figure was not written specifically and openly into the accounts. But I may be wrong on that.
But then I take Councillor Joyman's point. After the fact, it should be made public, shall it not? Because there was a huge amount of money spent on that vessel. Clearly was not procured properly in my mind. Sorry.
I'd need to go and dig out where the committee did discuss that some time ago when we looked at the accounts for the relevant year, as far as I recall. But maybe my memory is at full.
I think you're right, Councillor Jarman. There was it was previously raised at this committee, and there were reports kind of submitted. There are still going to be legal restraints around what you can, what you can't, bearing in mind the nature of why there was a financial settlement to begin with. Can I also, though, we've been talking about obviously financial rules and the fact that the CPRs have been updated. There was a paper brought to this committee back in September, which went through in detail all of the specific changes, and it would have given clarity around some of the additional enhancements for transparency. So just for reference, it was back on the 30th of September.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jarman?
Public interest, of course, does trump non-disclosure. So that's one thing that's true. The other thing I would like clarification of is, does the changes that bring in this degree of transparency under the Procurement Act, are they retrospective in terms of the council's current accounts or only future? So if we are holding money now as a council, is that money which we are holding now covered by the requirement for transparency, irrespective of when it was received? Or can we continue to obfuscate it within the accounts as we've been doing for some time?
I think we're talking about two different areas of transparency, and the transparency enhancements within the contract is moving forward, and it's about contractual spends and levels. That's where the enhanced transparency is required.
Councillor Churchman.
Yes, going back to page 180, I want the word aspiration of, or 2 words deleted. I won't vote for, won't agree to this otherwise, because it is not an aspiration. It is transparency and disclosure of the corporate plan. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Quirk, I think you had a question.
The issue is that the starting point should be maximum transparency. As soon as you start hiding things, people wonder why you're hiding them. There is probably some very good reason why some members and some officers would not want everything that was happened at the floating bridge to be known, because it would be a little bit embarrassing for them. So that's not a good reason for not being transparent. If you need contractually to do so, maybe you do. But in terms of property assets, rather than something that's being settled in the courts, there's no reason why, once you've settled and completed the deal, that the information shouldn't be available. When you're negotiating something, that's a different matter. And although everything is spent over £500 is on the website, everything that is received over £500 isn't on the website.
So in terms of these financial regulations that we're being asked to approve, is there something you feel is missing from those financial regulations?
I'm not suggesting we change anything now. I'm saying that for the next year's assessments, that's looked at.
Okay.
And probably that the transparency bit is not actually mentioned as transparency at all. It's mentioned as avoiding fraud. Well, one way that you avoid fraud is to be transparent.
So what I'm really keen on is we are being asked to approve some updated financial regulations here. I think we're beginning to stray into other areas which are probably not what we're being asked to consider at this point in time. That doesn't mean that they are not important, but I'm really keen to get to the point where we could give Mr. Downers assurance that those financial regulations as updated are now in place. So, Councillor Jarman, do you have something very specifically on that?
Yes, I propose we move forward on this item and approve the paper with the suggestion that the words aspiration of are removed from section 18, and then that we add to the approval that this is subject to future review by the PFR.
I'll second that.
Well, I think we are being asked to consider the approval of the financial regulations, whether or not an officer has written some words into their report that you don't like. I don't think we can retrospectively rewrite an officer's report to remove a word. Certainly, I'm sure officers and chief executive would have in mind whether or not they want that. It becomes, I don't think we can amend that report, because that is not a recommendation before us. That is somehow some officer has written their report. I have no problem with that, but maybe that's the way I appreciate the English language in a different way from others. But unless you want to make a recommendation such that otherwise, yeah.
What we're seeking is the approval of effectively the actual appendix, which does contain the transparency provisions within it. We will review, as a matter of course, all of the financial regulations on an annual basis anyway. So it's absolutely correct what Councillor Jarman says, that we will bring a future review to the new policy resources committee or through the audit committee, however it's going to work in the future governance arrangements.
Not all in the first month, which
I hope you understand what I'm saying about we can't go amending a report that's covering something that we are being asked to consider. The word aspiration, I don't think, is something that's in the financial regulations themselves, unless I've missed that word. Yeah. So the chief executive.
Thank you, Chair. You have touched on the point I was going to raise, which is the paragraph 18 is the covering report of the officer. and it is the appendix which is being sought recommendation for approval on. Members will be aware, I think it is actually in the wording in the corporate plan that they are, it is an aspiration of this council in terms of when the corporate plan was written to be transparent and open. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that there will be interplay between the financial regulations, the way in which our budget papers are brought forward, and the way in which the Constitution works in terms of confidentiality of information as well. And all of those matters will be part of the paper that you will be debating later this morning in terms of the Constitution, but also can be considered at the 6-month review of the new government's arrangements, which full council had set out to be part of the proposal for future governance of this council coming forward.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, are you content with that additional sort of discussion of what we're being asked to do? Are we content to approve the financial regulations detailed in Appendix 1? Councillor Quirk?
That was what I said in the first place.
Yes, I thought so. I thought so. But then we got slightly distracted by whether or not words in officers' reports. But I do understand. But we all read the English language somewhat differently. I'm prone to the Latinate forms of things. The Anglo-Saxon can sometimes be better and more forthright. And maybe those who are using Copilot to write reports might want to say, punch this up a bit. But on that basis, we have it moved, I believe, that option 1 of our recommendations, do we approve these financial regulations? Please show. Does anybody wish to oppose those? That's fair enough, thank you. But they are by a majority approved. So thank you, Mr. Downer, for that. The next item is Treasury Management Strategy, pages 239 onwards.
Thank you, me again, sorry. So this is the annual Treasury Management Strategy for the year 25-26, which we produce each year. As per the previous year's strategy, it's been prepared using the updated template from our Treasury Management advisors, Arlen Close, and it links with the wider budget planning assumptions in the council, for example, the capital programme. There's no structural changes to the format and content of the document. The main changes are the economic narrative section, which obviously the wider global position is changing daily. That's provided by Arlen Close, and then throughout the document, the metrics have been refreshed with the latest information. Actual monitoring and ensuring compliance of the strategy is dealt with through the standing item at this group, where we look at the quarterly reports on the Treasury management function.
Thank you for that. So just to frame our discussions that we are being asked to adopt this Treasury management strategy. Colleagues, do you have questions upon this?
I think the only question I would have is that I would assume that all of these policy documents would be addressed by the PFR relatively quickly from what they are now. And I don't think it would help us to go through now and preempt what they would do. But I also think that we should not be tying the hands of the PFR committee in terms of defining policy on these matters in the future. So they may come in at the end of May, may look at a number of these and make, in some cases, I would suggest quite significant changes. For example, environments, they might not say that the 151 officer can sign off such huge amounts of money as £250,000 as a change from budgets. They may decide that it's limited to £500 or £1,000 or some much more modest figure. But I think for us to try and prejudge what they would do would be unsatisfactory, and we should just accept that many of these issues will be significantly reviewed by them when they exist.
I hear what you say, but there may be, I know, I was going to try and search the draft constitution that's being put forward, but this committee will still also have responsibilities. They don't all necessarily pass over to policy fund. Otherwise, this committee wouldn't appear in that new draft constitution. So things like, I can't recall where Treasury management strategy is referred to in the draft constitution as to which committee is responsible for that. But we are being asked to approve something that needs to be in place for now. And for now, until May the 21st, we are operating under our current constitution. So I think it's really important that we do approve that. But I hear what you say. They're under the new system, there may be a movement around the responsibilities on strategies and policies. In terms of what is before us today, are there any questions? Councillor Quirk, are you question on?
Treasury management do a good job. It ain't broke. Don't try and fix it. I have moved that we adopt the recommendations.
I'll second that from the chair. Colleagues, if there are no questions on this, can we move to a vote on Councillor Quirk's motion there that we approve this show? That's a unanimous one this time. Thank you. And then we have item 10, which is the Q3 Treasury Management Report from page 271 onwards. Is this Mr. Downer again?
Yeah, so this is what I was referring to just now in terms of the monitoring of against the strategy. So in terms of monitoring against the 24-25 strategy, this is the latest quarterly report, the period October to December. As before, we're heavily supported by Ireland Close in terms of the required content and format. And again, there's a wider commentary within it about the economic conditions. As at the end of December, so the level of borrowing had reduced by 2.1 billion across the quarters, declining slightly by 1 million since the beginning of the year. This is all included in table 4 within the report. Due to a combination of continued investment income and reduction in borrowing costs, around 3.2 million has contributed towards the overall finance position for the council as at that quarter end during 24-25.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions on this report? Councillor Jarman.
Just to clarify your interpretation of the unbracketed number 8.7 at the end of table 1 on page 282.
So that's the potential need for borrowing at the end of March, subject to cash flow analysis in the build up to then. Within that assumption as well is some capital expenditure from this year's programme that may or may not happen before the end of the year. So it's still not a definite figure.
So that would be predicting an additional new borrowing within this financial year of 8.7 million.
Yes.
It's just that there have been articles in the press stating figures and contradicting each other about whether things were going up or down. I just wanted to be very clear that the prediction is a new borrowing of 8.7 million.
Yes, but this includes the actual cash flow position of the council as well.
Any other questions or comments on this report, colleagues? Doesn't appear so. I took a moment just now to check the draft constitution. It does look like this committee does retain certain responsibilities over Treasury management rather than policy, but there is reference to the Section 151 officer also reporting to the Policy, Finance and Resources Committee on Treasury management. But obviously constitutions are fluid things in the end, so it may be that another committee will take over approval of strategies as much as of monitoring them. But anyway, on this particular item, we are being asked to, and I've lost my place again, is to note. Colleagues, are you prepared to note this report? Please show if you are happy to do so. Thank you very much. If you will bear with me, colleagues, could we take a 5-minute comfort break? The chair is feeling a little uncomfortable at the moment. So if we will just pause the recording at that point, and I will take a comfort break. Anybody else as well? colleagues, I will restart. I am aware that Councillor Redrup isn't in the room at the moment. Hopefully, he will return soon. But thank you for affording that small comforting adjournment. We are now on to item 11, which is the council's risk profile. That's from 293 onwards. Ms Downer, do you want to highlight anything to us on that?
Thank you, Chair. This is a regular report that the committee sees each quarter. There are a couple of things I'll just draw attention to. Adult social care, under the director's leadership at the management team, undertook a full review of all of their risks in relation to this report. So those have been updated and are in there. One of the risks that has emerged more recently is in relation to the Adult Social Care Records database, which is currently hosted by the NHS service. There is an intention that that transfers over to the Isle of Wight Council's ICT hosting, and arrangements have been in place to make that occur. Sadly, some of those external providers who we need to be engaged in those conversations weren't engaging at the pace they needed to. So a risk was taken to the corporate management team in relation to that, and it's been accepted on, and you should see that in our next update if it's not been resolved by then.
Chair, sorry to interrupt. I wonder if we could deal with each of those 4 points one at a time, or do you want to save all the questions to the end?
How would you like me to do that?
Do you have questions on that particular point?
Yes.
Probably easier to take.
Would you like me to finish what I was saying and then take questions?
Yeah, you do, sir.
Yeah.
Then
Okay.
for the Councillor John.
Okay, so since the risk was agreed at corporate management team, there was the time to get it into the report for this particular publication. What I do know as a result of conversations with ICT and with the director is that those engagements have now started in earnest, and also there was a concern around the timeliness of the transition that has been extended now till June. So the actual risk that was discussed and agreed at the corporate management team has reduced somewhat from then anyway. That gives us more time now to effectively make that transition occur and ensure it happens effectively, to maintain those records in the right way and transition them over to the hosting of the council. Councillor Jarman, did you have some questions around that?
Councillor Jarman.
Yes, so I identified the same thing, so I knew it was coming through. So on that one specifically, with the transfer of the data from the NHS, has it been has it been sieved to remove tagging?
That database would never be open publicly to anyone other than those staff members who have the correct login credentials to enable them to actually access that information.
Because the NHS internally use AI platforms as well, as we've started to. So if they've introduced tagging into the data, are we sieving it to remove all tagging?
I'll get that confirmation from the ICT manager, but I wouldn't thought we'd be tagging anything, Laura.
I wonder, Councillor Garrett, if through you I may provide a bit more clarity. The system that has been adopted by the local authority was a system that was previously utilised by our colleagues in the NHS on the Isle of Wight. It is an old and closed system. It wouldn't enable AI tagging within that system. The NHS ceased using that system themselves almost 12 months ago now, and it's been solely utilised by the local authority. We are confident that there is no tagging within that system, but as we migrate data, a full assurance review of the data that we migrate will be undertaken. It'll be a temporary migration of what we have to a different server, virtual or physical, within the local authority, because we do need to re-procure that system in its entirety. And again, there will be a separate piece of quality assurance work undertaken as we migrate to a new system moving forward.
Any other questions on that one, Councillor Jarman? No? Okay. Thank you. The only other item that I'll draw attention to is in relation to the transition from a joint partnership with Hampshire for the public health function to the Isle of Wight from September. Just to assure the committee that the strategic board is in place to manage that through the Chief Exec and the Director of Public Health. There is also a project group, and work streams have started to make sure that that transition is smooth and effective for the island.
Thank you for that. And I certainly have a number of questions on this myself, but I've already indicated to Ms. Downer that I'll do that offline. I want to discuss some of the things that are, I feel, beginning to creep back in, which are not quite what a risk register should be looking at. That information is appearing as though it were a pressure point and whatever. But in terms of the register itself.
Question, three out of what, please? 5 out of what? I mean, it gives scores, but
So
what do they mean?
So is that relating to Appendix 2 then? So Appendix 2 is where it's highlighted how things are scored. But maybe if, Ms. Downer, if you do a quick update on how that's done.
The scores are calculated. There is an appendix on there that shows you how the scores are arrived at. So there's this explanation of what would be a high risk, a medium risk, how the impact of that is. And then what you would take is the scores together in the matrix. It's probably easier to look at the matrix if that's at all possible. So you can follow that through and see whether it's a 5 or a 13 or a 15, and that will explain that it's either a high risk, a medium risk or a low risk in relation to those scores. So there is a matrix attached as Appendix 2 that hopefully explains how we get to those numbers in that way. And the colour coding as well assists. So if it's green, then that's a very low risk. If it's a medium-sized risk, that's amber. And then if it's a high risk or a very high risk, then you'll see those as red risks in the report.
Although I appreciate you may have just, now that I think about it, was also Councillor Churchman may have been referring to the scoring which relates to one of the that circular device is used on responding to climate change. Maybe it was that you were referring to the scoring on, was it? Or was it specifically the scoring on the appendix side?
Sorry, apologies.
It was trying to understand the difference. Obviously, the bottom 2 are 5 each, the others are all 3. And it's just trying to understand what relationship they bear.
I realise I misapprehended Councillor Churchman's question. Misunderstood Councillor Church's question. It was relating to that section on responding to climate change and enhancing the biosphere, the scorings that are around that part. But does anybody know how these scorings are brought about? Yeah. We did, but anybody could quickly remind us.
I can explain the circular one, yeah? So if it's grey, that means it's got a neutral impact, means the decision or the information provided is neutral, it's neither positive nor negative. You'll notice 2 green scores, and that's where it's a positive impact. So for example, from memory, those are around the governance arrangements that are in place, etc. Means it's a positive thing to happen in relation to the report that's in front of you. So most of it's neutral, it has no effect. But on those two elements that are green, then that's a positive effect that the report comes to you and you can see it.
Thank you for that. So continuing along the points I was made, so first of all, reminding ourselves that you're seeking approval of the risk register at this stage. I will have those discussions myself. Colleagues, there are a number of strategic risks here. It may be more useful to go through them one by one if you've got particular points rather than dot backwards and forwards. So is there anything anybody wants to raise on strategic risk 1, which relates to lack of financial resource? Councillor Quirk.
The strategic risks are what they are. We've got plans in there as to how we address them. That needs to be picked up under the new committee system. Can I propose that once we've accepted this, we actually agree to circulate this when the new committees are appointed, that the members of the new committees get the risk assessments so that they can actually sort of be aware of the environment in which they have to be making their decisions.
a good suggestion. Specifically on the register, I was wondering if because I have a couple of things I want to raise, but I don't want to dot around between one strategic risk and the other. To structure our discussion, is there anything anybody wants to raise on strategic risk 1? No? Strategic risk 2? Strategic risk 3, that's on this insufficiency of staffing capacity and skills. There's a point that if the chief executive is still there, could we just have some a comment on the fact that you're identifying that mental health absence continues to be an ongoing concern. How much that is, what is the direction of travel in terms of that concern at the moment? Is it becoming more concerning, or is hopefully less concerning?
Chair, if I may, in response to your question, and thank you for raising it, because it is an important issue for us as an organisation. It is relatively stable at the moment. It's neither becoming more concerning or less concerning, and it is something that is managed both within teams and then within service areas and within directorates, and then reported onwardly to the corporate management team. And there is a significant amount of support available to members of staff working with our HR services and line managers should there be the need to support individuals in terms of mental health provision. Much of what we see may not necessarily be as a result of employment related mental health concerns, but as more about the wider environment for individuals as well. And so we do try and support all members of staff, regardless of what the issue is that's causing them concern. It's something that we track on a monthly basis in terms of staff issues, as you would expect an organisation of this size to do, and we will continue to do so as a matter of course. I suspect that, given the economic environment that we're working within, you know, on the island and just generally, there are concerns that will continue to occur for our staff members, as there are for residents in our communities. And what I would say is that we will continue to support staff as much as we possibly can as an organisation in that respect.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. The stability, at least, is more welcome than things becoming worse. But that's a helpful response. So that was on strategic risk 3. Strategic risk 4, anything on that? Councillor Critchison.
I was just going to comment that obviously it's still high on the risk level on this. And there was one point that mentions the customer expectations while trying to deliver on these corporate priorities at this point. And I wondered if perhaps that's something we could pick up on, how we could make those the sort of public expectations in this changeover period a bit easier on everybody, whether that was a press release out there or something to highlight that this is a time where there is a lot going on. There's that as a high risk there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on strategic risk 4 from colleagues? And 5, which was the failure to improve educational attainment. Anything on that? Councillor Jarman.
One of which was about the recruiting of the principal education psychologist and the education psychologist. I wonder if there's an update on where we are with those recruitments, please.
Shall I provide that, Chair? Thanks, Councillor Jarman, for raising that. So at the moment, we have appointed 1 educational psychologist. They will be starting later on this calendar year. In the meantime, what we have done is we've commissioned an external organisation to complete our statutory duties for which we need educational psychology input. So those are principally around the completion of education, health and care needs assessments as part of that statutory process around special educational needs and disabilities. So they are completing those at the moment. We do still have a backlog of assessments because we didn't have, there was a period of time where we didn't have access to educational psychology advice. And so because we had needs assessments still coming in, there was an accumulation of those, but they are being cleared as quickly as possible. And we will review whether we need to extend arrangements with that organisation or indeed another organisation prior to the start of our own in-house service. Although we have appointed one, we still need more than that, another 3. Including a principal educational psychologist. We continue to recruit to advertise for those positions, but as yet they're not filled. A bit of national context. I mean, this is a significant national challenge because basically what's happening is nationally the numbers of requests for needs assessments continues to go up about 10% a year. And it's not just about the advice that's given on the initial request, it's also when an annual review takes place, they may well need updated advice. So there's a huge increase in the national demand, statutory demand for educational psychologists. And unless the number of educational psychologists was also increasing 10% a year, you would have a gap developing in between supply and demand, and that is exactly what's happening. So we are waiting for government to share their thoughts on how this situation can be resolved nationally, because at the moment it looks like it will continue to be a very challenging situation. And of course, it's not just about having the advice which we need to meet the needs of children. It's also the fact that to an extent, this is a free market. There are a number of educational psychologists who are choosing to spend at least a proportion of their time working not for a local authority, but for the private sector. And indeed, that is the sector where we have had to turn, in common with many authorities around the country, in order to make sure we can get that advice to meet our statutory duties.
I've just got a couple of questions. So I assume that we were supplementing with external. What is the current average rate that one has to pay for a principal educational psychologist?
So it's about £700 to £750 a day, and to do one assessment takes 2 days to do the assessment and to write it up, which means the going market rate per needs assessment is approaching £1,500 per needs assessment request.
And those are reviewed annually, so.
Not every plan will be reviewed annually. They will be reviewed when there is a significant change, either in the needs of the child or in terms of their life stage. So if they were moving, for example, from primary to secondary school or from secondary into post-16.
And next question was the DSG. Is the 6.2 million overspend that we've got, that's this financial year, is it? It's not, do you have an idea? Obviously, that's before any school closures because we're not closing any, well, other than what has already been announced within this financial year. So that would be up to the end of March, effectively. That's 6.2 million overspend, would it?
That's right. So that's the forecast for the dedicated schools grant overspend for the current financial year, being 6.2 million. And the driver of that is the spend within the high needs block, which is the block within a dedicated schools grant, which the council uses to deliver its statutory duties relating to special educational needs and disabilities. And there's a considerable forecast to overspend for next year as well.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in the budget figures, which is useful. The other one is, where are we with this buyback of services from Hampshire? I think it was mentioned on one of the bottom of table, bottom of risk 5.
So Yeah, the bottom of that one. So there's a small service that's referred to there, which is the Standing Advisory Council for Religious Education. In terms of, that's relatively modest in terms of the financial impact there. In terms of all the other service level agreements, which we had, so when we became a standalone children's services organisation, 1st of February last year, there were in the region of 10 service level agreements. The only one, apart from this one mentioned there, which is relatively modest, which will exist beyond the 1st of April, i.e. into next financial year, is the multi-agency safeguarding hub out of hours service, which will continue until the end of March 2026. All the other services, those service level agreements will have ended by that date. So, for example, the daytime multi-agency safeguarding hub that came into operation. Our in-house on-island service came into operation 2 weeks ago today. We're running dual operation with Hampshire until the end of March, and then Hampshire, that arrangement will cease. And all the other arrangements will also have ended by then. Some of them came back in, for example, the unaccompanied asylum seeking children service level agreement, that actually came back in-house in November of last year. And there's actually a full write-up on that in the children's scrutiny meeting, which happened 2 weeks ago.
That's all I had on this one.
Thank you for that. So, Councillor Churchman, Strategic Risk 5.
Yes, the safety valve programme. I see it says reprofiling it. Is this costing us money? Is it effective? I keep seeing these add-ons to an already overloaded directorate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So the safety valve programme is a programme which the Department for Education started rolling out in 2021. Now extends to in the region of 40 local authorities. The new government has announced that they will not be talking to any additional authorities to enter that programme. So it will remain about 40. Is it useful, you asked? I would say absolutely yes, it is useful for two things, basically. The first one is that what it does is it challenges us as a local authority to look at our local arrangements and to check whether there's anything else we could be doing to support the needs of children and young people who have special educational needs and disabilities any better than we currently are, and to do so in a more cost-effective manner. So it's absolutely effective in that way. We meet with the Department for Education 3 or 4 times a year. We have an allocated Department for Education advisor who not only attends those meetings but also joins our SEND Partnership Board meetings. He's a member of that partnership board, which I co-chair with the Deputy Director of Children's Care of the Integrated Care Board, and he provides that ongoing support and challenge for us, and we really welcome that. The other reason that it's very useful is that so far it has continued to supply additional funding to the authority into the dedicated schools grant. So in total, it's in the region of about £12 million to be paid in instalments, and it is performance related. So when it talks about reprofiling, the fact is that when the agreement was first agreed back in March 2023, there was a forecast. There was a forecast in terms of spend profile, etc., and we have not been sticking to that forecast since basically since immediately after the agreement came into place. So the reason it's being reprofiled is every time we meet the DfE, they say, could you provide us with a new forecast of where you think you're going to be? So that is what the forecast, the reprofiling is. But having said that, it is useful because they so far, and they might not continue to do this, but so far they have continued to give the Isle of Wight Council the additional money that is available under the programme, even though we have not been sticking to the original profile. last thing on it, there's nothing in the agreement that we wouldn't want to do in the best interests of island children, because it's an example of where actually the best quality system is also the best value for money system. Because what the contract or what the arrangement talks about is a lot around early identification, early intervention and prevention work. And what that does is, if you can identify those needs early, it prevents them from escalating. And it talks about things like developing employment pathways for young people with additional needs into adulthood. So supported apprenticeships, supported internships, things like that. These are all brilliant things that we would want to be doing anyway in the best interests of island children, whether we're in the safety valve agreement or not.
Chair, may I come back? That has to be the good news story of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was strategic risk 5. Strategic risk 6. Any points to raise on that? Strategic risk 7. It's very short. And then strategic risk 8. I gave a heads up to the director that I wanted to ask her to comment on the pressure point identified as being unilateral decision making in NHS organisations, which results in unintended consequence for social care delivery. If you could just elaborate and comment on that, and how that is perhaps can be mitigated or is being mitigated.
Of course, Chairman, and I think it might help if I give some specific examples. What we've seen over the past 6 to 12 months is a number of decisions being made by our health partners in line with their own organisational priorities that have an unintended consequence for the local authority. We've briefly touched on one of those this morning, the shift of our NHS colleagues away from their Paris system to using System 1 in hospital services has meant that the council has ended up with a system that's unsupported that we're unable to maintain. For us, that means that we need to go out to procure a solution. It was never part of the organisation's thinking that that would be the case for us, and it was genuinely an unintended consequence. We see similar consequences by virtue of the change in which NHS organisations have been constructed on the island now, the partnerships with other organisations, the separation of community division of the Isle of Wight NHS Trust to form the new Foundation Trust, all have small, sometimes large, knock-on effects for the delivery of adult social care. In terms of how we mitigate those, we're relying quite heavily on engagement at the Health and Care Partnership with those key partners, early and preemptive conversations, and through discussions we have at an executive level on a weekly basis with the leaders of those groups. For us, there will always be those short notice challenging decisions that each organisation has to make, similarly for us, that have a knock-on effect. It's about becoming as sighted on those as we possibly can and attempting to mitigate those effects at an early stage.
Thank you for that. Councillor John.
Talking about, or following on really from what the chair has raised, well, I don't like the word unilateral. I much prefer some other process to occur. But have we managed to resolve our situation regarding the disagreements we've had with the NHS and its various bodies in terms of discharge arrangements and funding, particularly your area, though I know has had a major cost implication on it. I wondered whether we'd managed to resolve that, and indeed, have they paid the bill?
Councillor Jarman, those discussions are ongoing.
Take that as a no.
Councillor Church.
I'm receiving complaints about the ICB. First of all, they don't answer the phone. Secondly, they don't answer emails. I cannot understand how a board has been instituted, which then appears, according to my constituents, to fail completely. One of the most minimal things that happens is that they are still allowing stuff to be issued from Portsmouth in anything between 8 and 10 points in the form of any letters that arrive. I thought it was mandatory, a legal thing that all correspondence had to be in 14 points, but it isn't. I have, especially on the island, we have quite a lot of partially sighted people, and it's appalling they are receiving literature of any description for any reason in a typeface that is almost illegible. I just don't know how we can or get contact to the ICB to fulfil what I thought were statutory duties. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Churchill, apologies, Councillor Churchman, if it assists, I am aware that the point you've raised is being addressed directly by the Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee. It was an agenda item on their last meeting and it has been followed up by the chairman of that committee directly with the Integrated Care Board. In terms of the Integrated Care Board and the complaints that you may be receiving, I'd urge you to raise those directly with the ICB. It's not something within the control of the local authority or of adult social care. There is detailed information available on their website as to their statutory complaints policy and the procedure to follow. And I'd suggest that's probably the best way to take forward those concerns.
Thank you for that. So I can move on to the next strategic risk, which I believe is now strategic risk 9. Any questions upon that? And of 10? Anything on that? 11 is the new one, which will be coming, and therefore we're at strategic risk 12. We skip to anything on that. iOS PFI, didn't see no bold text on that. Good to see reference in strategic risk 13 about the final situation with the waste to energy plant, which has been there for a long time on that risk register. So any questions on 13?
Ask for an update on that, really. That was the risk still as high on that with sort of operational disruption, etc. with that contract. So Tash about that. Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Christensen. So the energy from waste plant was a significant risk in terms of the amount of time it was taken to be completed. It has now passed its acceptance tests and is going through the 90 days of snagging, which is finishing off the final exterior civils works, lining, signing, and usual traffic management things that need to be done. In terms of the other items that relate to the waste contract, there are still outstanding risks in relation particularly to the volatile recycling market. So after we collect recycling and sort it, materials need to be sold onward into the appropriate recycling market for papers, plastics, metals, etc. The recycling market does have geopolitical influences, and as trade moves around Europe, we see an impact on the pricing that exists within there, and there is a mechanism where we regularly rebase recycling payments, so it becomes a financial risk within the contract. So that is a risk that will continue to sit outstanding as we move into interesting trade times across Europe. And we also have some outstanding changes in law, particularly in terms of persistent organic pollutants and foam-based materials. So regulatory changes were made that brought domestic upholstered seating into a hazardous waste category. So you can sit on your sofa at home with a tear in it and it's fine. But the minute you put it in a waste bin or a tip or a skip, it's considered as hazardous as asbestos. So we have a completely different regime. We need to deal with those materials. And we are aware that it's quite likely in the near future that will be extended beyond domestic furniture into commercial and care home setting, foam beds, mattresses, sofas, etc. So there is a risk that sits, although they are risks that hopefully will be reducing as we work through our contractual matters in coming months. Thank you.
If there's nothing else on 13, strategic risk 14 around the vision for the islands. Yes, Councillor Jumper.
The only thing I have here is that the column on the right-hand side seems to be void. Like I would have expected quite a number of comments in there, and it's not been completed. I wondered if that was that there are no pressure points and everything's honky-dory, if we're allowed to use that word. I'm not sure nowadays, but or if not, I apologise. But or if it's not been completed yet.
Maybe they're being very well mitigated, but but Ms. Downett, any?
There were no updates from the corporate management team or the owners of those mitigations for this part of the report.
So it was just that nothing was provided.
Everybody responded. There was requested to put an update in.
The chief executive could probably help us on that. Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. I think in terms of in relation to delivering the vision for the islands, this is very much about the way in which we manage our performance management through the QPMR and reporting on various activities in relation to the corporate plan on an ongoing basis. Of course, members, you will be aware that once we move to the new governance arrangements from May, one of the early asks of the Policy Resources Finance Committee will be to consider a review of and a new corporate plan moving forward, at which point we will be able to significantly review this risk as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jarman, anything else on?
No, I don't think it was the same.
So any comments on strategic risk 15 of 16 of 17 and of 18? There are none. Thank you, colleagues, for allowing me to go through in that detail. I thought it's partly because I'm aware this is the last committee of before we move to new governance arrangements. And I was keen that committee had taken every opportunity to look at this. Of course, it would be an ongoing thing under the new committee, but there's a new system and a whole annual council to go through as well. So who knows who'll be sat here in July. Otherwise, do we approve the risk register? I'll move that we do from the chair. Those in favour of approving. Thank you. That is unanimous. Colleagues, it is now 12:30. We've got till 1 o'clock before we would have to seek an extension, if that's right. I know that my diary is pressing, but I'm also very aware that the business next is incredibly important. Do we think we need to extend the meeting, or do we think we can deliver of our deliberations in the next half an hour? Right, okay, that's an indication that Councillor Quirk would have to leave. If we can, but I'll keep an eye on it. If we need to extend, I'll also then have to make a phone call to postpone something that I'm due to be at 1:15. So anyway, so we move to future governance update report. This is something that they're almost there. So I remind you that lots of work has been done around preparing for the new committee system, including the preparation of constitution. We're being asked to consider and make them recommendation to full council for taking on board the draft constitution, reminding ourselves, of course, that it is not until the annual council. Let's try again, shall we? Yeah. Right. We'll try it again. Hopefully that's fine. Okay, just to remind, it'd be one of the very earliest pieces of business of the annual council on May the 21st, which will be to formally adopt a new constitution, a constitution for the committee system. So, and I just want to record my thanks to all those involved in preparing that constitution from the officers' side. There have been enormous pressures on them, given staff issues because of unfortunate ill health. The sudden announcement by the government that it wanted to work at great pace on ideas around devolution and local government reorganisation, and yet still here we are with a draft constitution before us. There's a couple of decisions yet to be made. I just asked Claire Shand if she's still on. Is she still on, or has she left us? Francis and Wendy. Wendy, do you wish to make any comments?
Just to say, Chairman, that unfortunately Claire Shen has had to leave for another appointment, but I know that Francis is on and will be able to answer any technical points should you need any done.
And Mr. Fernandez, Francis, do you want to highlight anything to us before we begin our discussions?
Hi, Chair. Hi, Committee. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Because I was automatically muted and I've been unmuted. Yeah, just wanted to nothing massive from me in terms of highlighting to the committee, because I think we've been through this on a number of occasions, and a huge amount of work has gone into preparing this document. What I would add, councillors, is that as you mentioned, Chair, the final adoption is in May. And whilst we don't want to necessarily tinker with this document, there are elements that we might need to revisit and kind of nuance a bit as we head towards the May committee. So I'd be very interested. So I won't go through the report because I know time is tight. So you don't want to hear from me. I think members want to hear from members. But if you've got any queries, if you've got any issues you want to raise, I'm here and happy to support the committee in any way I can. But I would mention that a huge amount of work has gone into preparing this document from my colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Mr. Fernandez. So there are two items within our report we're being asked to consider specifically around. So you'll find those at paras, I've lost them already, para 9A and 9B around public question time being the feature of any agenda, including extraordinary full councils, and whether or not there should be a guillotine procedure on things. If we could have a discussion around those, and also if I could highlight that we add a recommendation that we recommend to full council that just to confirm, it's usually accepted, but to confirm that delegated authority is given to the monitoring officer or their nominee to make those necessary technical or typographical or other amendments that may arise from our continuing thoughts around this. So we might add that as another recommendation. But if I could bring us directly to those two matters, bearing in mind, and just for those who are looking in or maybe listening to this recording at some time, this committee, its members have been meeting informally all the way through and giving steering and guiding and questioning on a very regular basis, a very insightful basis, I hope, to help officers in delivering this. So we do have these two things. I think the first is probably uncontentious, the idea that there should be public questions at all full councils, including those which are extraordinary. But does anybody wish to argue against that? No, I didn't think so. But the other one, and I know this is something that Councillor Brodie has raised, because he has paid great attention to the new drafting of the new constitution outside of those of us who are members of this committee, around whether there should be a guillotine procedure to when basically at the close of full council, if there is business still being transacted, that it should be voted upon or not. By my recollection over the last 2 or 3 years is we've had two situations where that might have been considered the case. One where a vote was indeed taken at the chair's discretion, even though some argued that we had timed out for that meeting. That was in the last few months, I believe. And another time when a motion was taken, I think it was yours, Councillor Jarman, where we moved, the council used its procedural rule to move immediately to a vote. My own view on this, just to start the discussion, is I don't think we need a formal guillotine procedure for the full council. I think good chairing will make sure that we are aware of the time, that if members are very much exercised to move to a vote, they will move that procedural device to move to a vote, as they did with your motion, Councillor Jarman, only a couple of councils ago. But it's open to all of us to debate whether or not we want to recommend to full council that we include or not a guillotine procedure. So, Councillor Churchman, sorry. I think we've all managed to call each other by different names.
I'm going to grow a beard. we do need public question time. As you said, it is down to good chairing, except that we elect a chairman every year. Normally, the chairmanship lasts anything between, I can remember when we had a chair for 4 years, and that gave people to get their feet under the table. So we have to remember that whoever gets elected as a chair, it might be their first time in office, and it is not easy. 38 people sitting under, or 37 sitting in front of you, some with quite strong egos. Public question time has to be stayed. You cannot deny we are an open and transparent council, and it is the one opportunity. We find it difficult to get the public engaged in politics as it is.
And I think that it's not a contentious issue, the public question time, it's the guillotine issue.
And what was the other one that we talked, about guillotine?
Francis, I think it may be your microphone that's causing us some feedback.
I mean, quite frankly, rules have been made to be broken. We are not such a rigid society that we conform completely to the clock on the wall. So I'm sorry, I don't agree with the guillotine. There will be the very odd occasion when it is necessary to go over time. And how often has it happened in the last 3 years? Very, very rarely. Yeah, thank you.
Any other colleagues? Oh.
I'm not a great fan of breaking the rules because it upsets people and you get all sorts of repercussions. I am in favour of the partial guillotine, i.e. that at the end of time, the vote is taken before the meeting closes, so that you don't get filibustering at the end of the session to push it into the next meeting. I think when you're discussing a motion, either the chairman should say, we haven't got time to discuss it, we'll close the meeting now, or you discuss it and then you stop the filibustering and you take the vote. And I think that partial resolution is a good way to make sure that the workings of the council are not disrupted by inappropriate behaviours.
Any other thoughts on this? At the moment, they're written in is the new procedural 9 would keep that partial guillotine. Anybody else have a thought on whether or not we should be recommending to full council that it be retained in? Councillor John.
So I thought about this quite a bit, and there are clearly pros and cons both ways. I like there to be rules. I'm not pedantic about it, but I do like there to be rules, and I do like, if there are rules, I like them to be followed. What I think is, first of all, I think strong chairing is always a good answer. And if we have a strong chair, but I cannot rely on that, so I can only rely on there being rules. That's my basic philosophy on the question. Where we are to have a closure on an issue, I do not believe it should be at the chair's discretion to continue the meeting in an unlimited way. I also do not like the procedure where people can simply go immediately to the vote, where the people who brought those motions are unable to speak to them. That seems to truncate debate completely, and I think that is inherently undemocratic. So I think it's better that the choice as to whether to bring it to the vote or to leave it to the next meeting, if there is insufficient time, should be offered by the chair to the people bringing that motion to defer it. And that would simply resolve the issue completely. And then they can either choose to take it immediately to the vote, to defer it, or to withdraw the motion.
So, Francis, Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I don't want to interject in the political debate, which clearly needs to happen, but I just wanted to outline to members, in terms of a meeting, the rules help the meeting get from beginning to the end, and a lot of councils do have this rule for that very reason. So it's not about stifling debate, it's just a mechanism that the council can follow. There are other ways around this if that rule is too rigid, and one of them is, for example, suspending standing orders. So if the standing order is saying that the guillotine must fall, there's always a mechanism for council to say, well, no, we will suspend standing orders so that the guillotine doesn't fall, so the issue can continue along its path. But what I would say is that it is useful for the chair and for the meeting to have a kind of rules envelope from which to work. So it just sets a baseline for the meetings rather than trying to control the issue, because there is the suspension of standing orders that can take place. So I just thought I'd mention that, but it's ultimately committed to your debate. Thank you.
Thank you for that. My sense is that this is probably one area that, although I'm not keen on the wording that's been proposed, in that actually I'm not going to die in a ditch on this one. That we do make the recommendation that as the draft constitution as actually is at the moment, the appendix to the full council. If anybody there at full council in 9 days' time wishes to bring an amendment at that point, that we leave it to them to do so. Do you think so? We keep in the partial guillotine. That means that the business would be voted on at that time. But I absolutely hear, I'm sure we would remember, of course, this annual council can adopt whatever it adopts. It may want to change things even between now and then. And there is going to be a 6-month review point where we look at how things are working as well. So, colleagues, do you think you're happy for that to be the case, that and that includes me, who's not necessarily in favour of this. But Councillor Spinker's also spoken to me about the place of the planning protocol that has long been awaited, but its gestatory period is extending more and more. I think what we've been needing to look at there is to also indicate that maybe that is something that continues to be worked upon, but with as much a hard deadline as possible for the planning protocol as it was being revised of May the 21st, when there's also an annual council. So that could be part of those discussions there, because I'm acutely aware that we could try and fix certain things now, but we've got a whole new governance structure from May the 21st. But anybody wish to comment around that area? Councillor Jarman, please.
So I think it's essential that we get this one nailed down and produce it. But of course the issue of policy documents isn't limited simply to planning. There are other policy documents as well, which comments and if you like confusion with the old constitution have been removed, and we've been studious about doing that. The result is, though, that although we've excised those components and those points of duplication, we've not yet replaced them with a suitable alternative. And that does leave us in a little bit, I think, of an exposed position ahead of May, that whilst we will be bringing forward a new constitution, we won't be bringing forward several issues of policy determination or mechanisms, including the planning issue. So I guess the question is how, I know it's in a near finished state. I guess the question is how quickly can the planning protocols excised component of the constitution be brought forwards?
There's going to be publication of council papers, I believe, tomorrow. It'll be tomorrow, won't it? I don't think there's very much of a hope it'll be before May. But the question is, how quickly can it be brought forwards?
It could be brought forward quite. Let me use mine. It could be brought forward quite quickly. There's been a number of reasons why it hasn't proceeded as rapidly as one would like, but they can be overcome. But I was simply concerned to some extent,
the case, there's been quite a lot of confusion about who's drafting this, to the extent that in the current constitution, there are parts that have been drafted with the best intentions by officers. I don't know really now, it seems to have got a very confusing situation. I'm content for the planning protocol group to take back control of it. But I don't want to do all of that work and then find that actually it's to be done by officers. The other point, which is an important point, is that I had understood that as far as planning is concerned, because planning is a movable feast in as much as the law changes quite regularly, that planning would be not part of the constitution, but would be a protocol, and that it would be approved by planning committee rather than full council. Because if it's approved by full council, then every change has to be approved by full council, and we will by definition therefore be behind the times. So those 2 points I think need to be clarified before worthwhile work can be recommenced.
I think at this stage, Councillor Spink, I couldn't clarify that for you now, but I can take that away as a matter of semi-urgency, because it is only a couple of months till then. I think it is okay to reserve things to full council, bearing in mind full council can delegate that down. All of these committees are going to be committees of, as they already are for some, committees of the council. So, and I hear what you say, that you wouldn't want planning revisions in the way things must be done held up by having to wait for the next full council. So if you're content for me to take that away as an action, I'm not sure Democratic Services will remind me to do so. I will do so, and we will liaise otherwise in the usual sorts of ways.
I can certainly agree to that with respect. I'm very content with that. And just by way of update, the way that it has taken place is that I basically drafted the changes, and they've all been done, all drafted. The only thing is that the last few changes have yet to be approved by the protocol committee. So we can reconstitute the protocol committee and see whether or not those are approved. And that can be done within say 2 weeks notice to the members, and then we can sit and do that. But it was, I understand, a condition that it then has to be approved by a planning committee. Now, whether that's an end of it or whether or not it then has to go on to full council, it's a matter really for not for me to determine.
I can't give you a clear answer on that, afraid, Councillor Spink. But let us have a conversation if that's okay. Because I hate to rush members, but we are close to being out of time unless we extend. Councillor John.
Yes, I think resolving it for planning is clearly the priority, and it was the agreement that it would be excised from the document. Of course, the document still refers to it as being one of the available protocols and one of et cetera, but some of 4.8 still does remain in there as a little tail I noticed at the very end. But when that does get resolved, and I won't bring too many other issues in here because we are on the clock, that other protocols which are referred to in the main body of the document also need to be brought up to date or concluded. And I think the reality is that many of those will have to come later. And I imagine later in the 6-month review, we'll finalise the excising of that 4.8 section as well.
I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Jarman. We need to get this thing working on May the 21st. Be alive to any urgent changes which can be made by full council at any point to its constitution. But at that 6-month review, that's the point where we have a lot of things. It's not a snagging list, it's a review list that we look at those. One of those other protocols that we will need to look at, I know, is the engagement with the local councils, our town and parish and community councils. I did some work on a revised protocol there, but that was under the guise of under what was then was a cabinet system. We are moving to a different sort of system, different arrangements, and we will also have to be very aware that although IWOC represents the overwhelming majority of the local councils on the island, we have a duty as the council, full council, the unitary authority council to engage with all of those local councils, not just those who are members of IWAC or even of HELC, the other organisation.
So as I was saying, I think those other protocols will have to come in. It's why many of us who might have done more at this stage have left it. For example, there's no point dealing with many of the budgetary protocol changes I would like to see, because we've done this year's budget and we've got the 6-month review to get them into the next one.
Indeed. So if you're content, colleagues, I will move from the chair that we, where are we? The 2 recommendations there, with the 3rd recommendation to full council, that it confirms the delegated or otherwise a delegated authority to the monitoring officer or their nominee to make such changes to the draft constitution are as necessary for clarity and typography. There was another term and I can't remember what it was, but and such other administrative matters, if that's okay with you. I'll move that from the chair. I'd be content with that. We'll show. I think there's a huge sigh of relief going on in some parts of the building that we have got to this point. Full council will debate that constitution. There are many other things, of course, happening related to being prepared for May. The mock committees, the briefings, the staff briefings and engagement that's going on, the communications that is being planned to the public as well, to make sure that they know something that they probably won't have too much engagement with, but think things are changing in the way we will make our decisions. I'll move us on then to, so I don't think item 13 is a standing item of review of the constitution. I think that has occurred. Item 14 is my annual report. So I present it to you. Hopefully it is a fair summary of the work that we have been doing. I've tried to outline some of the challenges that will be coming down the road, identifying not least just the general issues that we've been looking at all along, but potentially the changes out of government around devolution. Its devolution agenda could see us having more things to think about in the governance way of things. Can I just also thank you? This is our last meeting before annual council. No one knows who will be chairing which committees from that point. Can I thank you for your engagement all the way through, particularly through the informal side as well, because it's been a lot of work for a lot of us, and it's been enormously helpful in getting us there here. I'd also like to thank all the officers, particularly Elizabeth and Geraint, if I can use your first names this time. I usually don't, for their support in my role as chair, along with everybody else, people such as Debbie and others. I put that I am not going to move my own recommendation that you, whatever it is, note my report or whatever, but you can move my report. Hopefully it did satisfy what was needed for in the way of an annual report. And, we'll take a vote on that you're noting that. Yeah, I will vote for my own report. Anybody against or abstaining on that? No. So that leaves us to the work plan. It is at page 695. Any comments on the work plan? No. In which case there's just members' question time with about 4 minutes to go. Councillor Sarah Redrock did send me a question. It wasn't in time for a guaranteed written response, but she has, in her guise as the chair of the Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee, so recognising it remains a statutory requirement for the council, she has concerns about the proposed committee structure and way it may limit scrutiny just to the first half of meetings, both in restrictions of time and topic number. But she raises an important point. We have in the past used start, task and finish groups to achieve our aims under scrutiny committees, and she is requiring, would it be possible for that to be able to carry out some of the functions of the scrutiny element of that? So, and in particular, the 6-month review, could how scrutiny be noted for review with the possibility that that may lead to exploring a separate health and social care scrutiny committee. My answers throughout to those are yes, as far as the draft constitution as is adopted at May the 21st will allow, but I certainly think all of the scrutiny functions that remain ours to statutorily carry out should be part of the review process at the 6-month side of things. And if we can use task and finish groups to further scrutiny where we're required, over and above what we will do anyway through our service committees, then we should do so. So I hope that meets with your approval. I'll formally write back to Councillor Sarah Redrup in that context. Thank you very much, Chris. And it's agreed, I think, by members. Thank you. In which case, unless you have any questions yourself in the next 3 minutes to ask of this committee and myself as chair, I think. Councillor Clerk, do you wish to ask a question?
I just think we should finish the last meeting with thank you for chairing the meeting for the last year, and thank you to the officers who supported us.
Certainly the officers put up with us and support us. No, they don't put up with us. They support us extremely well, and they understand our concerns. And I know from discussions offline as chair, all of those concerns that are raised in these meetings are always taken very, very seriously and are thought deeply about. Councillor Rayburn.
And Chris Clerk, thank you, and especially to yourself. You've taught me a lot in this period of time. You're committees. Thank you very much.
You're very kind. If I had time, I'd reciprocate by grabbing a donut up the road, but there isn't time, unfortunately.
I'll add my personal thanks to that, and for you putting up with my somewhat pedantic nature at times.
As I always explain to my tutees when answering certain questions on the science exams, you have to be a pedant. I'm a great fan of pedantry in its right place, and I've never seen any of your questions as being pedantic. They have been searching. So, Councillor Church.
It's the first, in 20 years, it's the first time I've sat on audit, and I'm beginning to think, what have I been missing? Because I have learned so much from officers and from the pedantic people, Chris, you and
Councillor Jarman.
Because believe you me, your attention to detail is quite phenomenal. And I personally really do appreciate it. Thank you.
That's very kind. I'm going to close the meeting there with 1 minute to spare. Otherwise, we have to extend. Oh, Councillor Church.
I propose that all councillors have to do a term on audit so they know more about the whole council and the governance of it.
Absolutely. And there's the meeting is closed. Thank you.